So the last two books of the Mahabharata can be taken kind of together as a single unit because they describe the journey of the Pandavas up to heaven and what happens to them when they get there. Book 17 is called the Mahaprasthanika Parvan, or the Book of the Great Departure. It's the shortest book of the epic with only 3 chapters. Book 18 is called the Swargarohana Parvan, the Book of the Ascent to Heaven. It's not much bigger than the other one. It has 5 chapters. Again, even though they're so short, they're packed with quite a lot of important religious concepts about death and the afterlife. In particular, there's a kind of grand vision that tries to unify those 2 different concepts of what happens to a person when they die. Remember, the old idea was to go to heaven and hang out with Indra and the other gods. The newer notion is the idea of karma and rebirth, as well as liberation or final moksha of the Atman from this never-ending process. The books also wrap up, of course, the whole plot of the epic. They close off those 2 outer frames, if you remember those. Let's see how they do it. Now, at the start of book 17, Yudhishthira decides it's time for them to leave the world. And so he installs his grandson Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu with Uttara. Abhimanyu, remember, was the kid who died in the war. And Uttara was the daughter of Virata. He installs Parikshit as the new king. He would have been, if my calculations are correct, he would have been about 36 years old at the time, so he's not super young. Krupa, remember the fellow who'd survived the war on the Kaurava side, who had slaughtered all the Pandavas at night? He gets installed as the Brahmin minister, which is a clear indication that the old feuds have completely ended. If you can install a guy who had murdered all of your warriors in as the new preceptor. The 5 Pandavas and Draupadi all renounce all of their possessions. They dress in rags, and then they start on foot to go to the Himalayas because they're looking for a pathway to heaven. As they walk along, a dog starts to follow them. They reach the top of the Himalayas, where one by one each of them falls and starts to die. The first to go is Draupadi, and Yudhishthira tells Bhima that she's died because she didn't love all of her husbands equally well. In fact, she loved Arjuna the most. Next to go is Sahadeva, who it turns out is too prideful. Then Nakula dies, and Yudhishthira says it's because he was too vain about his good looks. Arjuna goes next, and Yudhishthira explains is because he was too proud of his military skills. Now it's just Yudhishthira, Bhima, and the dog. Bhima falls down, and as he's dying, Yudhishthira tells him that it's because he likes to eat too much. Yudhishthira finally reaches the top of the mountain, and Indra comes down on his sky chariot, telling Yudhishthira to climb aboard, and he'll take him up to see his brothers and his wife who are in heaven. Yudhishthira he says, let me take the dog too, since the dog has come this far. Indra says, there's no place in heaven for dogs. Sorry. Right? But then Yudhishthira, feeling compassion, it's an important thing, refuses to get into the chariot if the dog can't come either. Right? The dog now reveals who he really is. It's not just a dog. It turns out the dog is not a dog, but a god. Lord Dharma himself again, Yudhishthira's father who had been testing him. He praises his compassion, and they all go up to heaven together. Book 18 is now about what happens when they reach heaven. Yudhishthira enters heaven, and he's shocked because the first person he sees is not his brothers, but Duryodhana and the other Kauravas, who are just hanging out. They're comfortable in their thrones. They're having a good time. Yudhishthira is totally upset about this. He says he'd rather not stay in heaven if his brothers and his wife aren't there and if these guys are there. Right? A heavenly messenger explains that no one is entirely good. No one is entirely bad. Once you die, if you've committed more virtues than sins, then you experience the punishments first and the rewards later. And then vice versa. So that's why the good people are all in hell at the moment, while Duryodhana and the other wicked folks are here enjoying heaven for a shorter amount of time. Yudhishthira says if that's so, then he'd rather go see his family first. A messenger then takes him down a dark and stinky pathway where he hears his brothers, Draupadi and Karna, all calling out to him, wailing in great pain and suffering. Yudhishthira angrily says that he'll stay there with them. Dharma then again shows that this has all been one final illusion that he's had to suffer through because he has lied to Drona about his son being dead. He finds out that his brothers and Draupadi have actually all been cleansed of their sins and they've escaped the cycle of human rebirth and in fact returned to their original divine forms as Indra, Vayu, and so on. Yudhishthira then bathes in the celestial Ganges, sheds his human body, and assumes his heavenly form as Lord Dharma. Now, once the epic is over, Vyasa's student, remember Vaishampayana, now stops his storytelling session, and the king Janamejaya realizes the futility of vengeance and violence, retributive violence, and so he ends that genocidal snake sacrifice, remember, that he had been conducting, where all the snakes are flying into the fire, and the book and the whole epic then draws to a close.